Oh, we'll get started with the series, and we're going to talk about Shoorveer that is streaming on Hulu. Michael, did you get to watch it?
I did get a chance to watch Shoorveer, and for those of you that don't know, Shoorveer, and really, it doesn't need a really long explanation to kind of get across what this show is all about. Shoorveer is what we like to call an Indian Top Gun franchise, or maybe even a Top Gun franchise wannabe. So essentially, there's this imminent attack that threatens India, and there is this elite task force that is kind of brought together across like three different units in order to kind of test their limits on their like courage and grit. And it's really just like this series, very, very similar in like Top Gun fashion of like their training and their interactions with each other. Personally, for me, like, even just getting like, halfway through the series, I just wasn't feeling it as much. It seemed, I mean, one thing that we discuss here all the time is like we hate cliches, and this series definitely had a decent amount of those in terms of like it was trying to be 80s, but it couldn't really pull it off. I couldn't tell like if it wanted to be possibly a Top Gun franchise, or even like I was kind of getting like A-Team, vibes without all the comedy as well. So I mean, I'm not quite sure which direction this wanted to take. It didn't really land for me in that sense, but would love to hear your thoughts.
So you're absolutely right. If it did not land for you because you were kind of reading it, right, instead of me actually listening and understanding the language, the Hindi, it definitely did not land for me because of the dialogues, more or less. Because not only was the entire framework of the show very wannabe, but they're talking about modern warfare. They're talking about cutting edge mil tech and border defenses, and this very impetuous guy in the middle of it who's just like a Pete Mitchell, does stuff without thinking, but he does it for the greater good of the country. So hey, we'll say sorry to him and we'll move on. And then the good part was there were two women right in the middle of all of this, so they did show women pilots, which is great. And then of course, the downside for me was the fact that it was very mediocre. There was inexplicable. I just don't know why the subplots and the characters, and sometimes I felt that somebody just put the stock videos of a lot of fighter jets, doing the sorties together to actually put together this entire show. And VFX or the flight, nothing was spectacular. And I think we're spoiled for choice as well, Michael. After having watched Top Gun, the standards are so high with
And the Gray Man.
air combat scenes that Tom Cruise pulled off that this is it just didn't cut it for me.
Well, special effects aside, to like just a lot of the things, the plot and like characters as well, just like weren't coming off. Like sure, like if you're wanting to go for something like Top Gun, you really need like either that kind of a budget or that kind of like expertise on set. But in terms of even like writing and production, like this series actually had some talented writers on it. It actually had a pretty good staff, and I mean, really like its kind of attempt at pulling off a series like this just kind of came across as mediocre. What do you think went wrong?
I think what went wrong was just the disjointed way in which the series story was told. I mean, there were the parts that didn't fit in together with the other parts. There was this love angle coming in one go, the personal angles, which we see in other such shows and movies as well. But over here, those angles went a lot slower. So the time on action, I missed the time on action. I wanted this to be the thriller because this was about their professional lives. I wish this could have been a more thrilling thriller because the way the terrorists were moving out of Kashmir in Pakistan to Kashmir in India, and how the border crossing, and how these people actually went into the sorties to actually stop them, and all the technology that I would have loved for them to talk more about technology. I would have loved to talk to them about their surface to air missile. All these things were so important to the plot. That entire plot of a of a Pakistani spy being inside India's most elite defense project, having as a part of the team that made the surface air missile. That's crazy, and I didn't see the execution. He was caught so easily. I swear to God, I was like, at least you're just smart enough to be there for 5 years. You should be smart enough not to get caught like that. So a lot of things that just didn't make sense. Just didn't make sense. Of course, the actors were phenomenal. Martin Deshpande, he was the NSA chief, and we saw him on screen after a long time. Manish Chaudhary, who's we've seen in other shows, including Arya, for that matter. He really plays his part well, and he looks dapper playing the part. He looks that part, and he doesn't sound out of depth at any point in time with his character. But what really hit me were the other, the other characters, the other actors. Either they didn't have the meat to perform, or they were supposed to do more. They're supposed to do scenes they weren't trained or comfortable in doing. Middle of the flight, the guy takes his oxygen mask off, and I'm like, dude, no, don't do
Yeah, there's plenty of room within Bollywood for, a type of film like this, these espionage type material to really be pulled off. It is kind of like unfortunate to see that like a really, 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 really good one, like, similar to what we've seen with Top Gun or other movies, hasn't been pulled off yet. And so, whether it's, getting into a more like deeper level with the material, kind of as you were mentioning earlier, rather than just kind of playing around with this kind of stuff, or maybe it's just some better special effects, some better action shots, whatever it is, like we can definitely see that like, whoever's trying to produce these now, they're definitely lacking in those areas. And that's ultimately,
Absolutely, the quality of VFX was bad. The CGI was oppressive. Oh God, it was no, not at all. The CGI was patchy. You and I could do that CGI. And just at the cost of sounding a little out of place, but there is this entire theme uh across the entire series there was so much nationalism and patriotism in it that at some point in time it's like, why don't you focus on making a good story? Just focus on the script, focus on the stunts that you're trying to pull off, focus on your combat shots, instead of this entire patriotic derangement syndrome throughout the episodes. That is a common theme. Okay, you want to be patriotic, great, but focus on the story that's telling that story, because you're making that entire patriotism stand out like a sore thumb now because you don't have a story to wrap it around.
couldn't agree more.